welcome everyone to what I've been informed by Murph is episode 49. This week we had a very interesting guest and a nice little manoeuvre away from our, I suppose, as we've come to learn, dryland sports. And we had an S&C, or the S&C for Swim Ireland in Paul Talty on with us today. So he gave us some insights into, I suppose, the overall development of the swimmer, the swimming athlete, and some of the, I suppose, the key approaches they have, especially which is obviously timely with Tokyo just around the corner, Tokyo Olympics. So that it was a fascinating episode, and one of the big things for me that came from this episode is that I'm also the only member of the three of us not to have over the head earphones, so I feel quite left out. But anyways, what do you think of today's chat? What were the kind of main takeaways for you? Murph, do you want to jump in?
I like just some of the planning for the logistics around Tokyo and stuff, because you often think, like, okay, what do we do physically? Okay, go to Tokyo and perform, but what needs to be in place to support all that? And he said he came into the role the end of 2018, and an awful lot of work had actually been done by his predecessor, which just shows how far in advance it takes to plan for a competition like that, albeit it was pushed back a year, but still. Also then just some of the stuff around like how important it is to communicate with the actual coach, the swim coach, him being the S&C, and how they really give a sense of, maybe he's bullshitting us, but they give a really good sense of they dovetail together really well, and one really informs the other, and it's an overall plan as opposed to this is swimming, this is the S&C, let's hope they don't take from each other. What about you, Shane?
I'm definitely a big fan of the term dryland sports. But yeah, it was really interesting to see, because it's a sport like I have absolutely no experience in really, and just seeing how they program for it, especially with such a heavy workload. Like, these boys and girls are fit, like it's a ridiculous level of conditioning, and just how to work strength training around that without, obviously, like, you have to be able to move your arms, so you can't just work them to the bone in the gym and then have them flailing around in the pool. So it's really good to see how he programs for things like that. But yeah, I found it really interesting.
Brilliant. All right. Well, look, let's jump into today's episode, and I hope you all enjoy. Paul Talty.
Paul, quite a varied background there. We were just chatting about your time with Lochiel Shamrocks. We spoke before about the Antrim Hurlers. You worked as a personal trainer yourself, doing a PhD in Gaelic football, and you're currently with Swim Ireland. That is very varied and diverse. Do you want to give us a little bit of background as to how you ended up there, and how some of the different learnings from what would appear completely different areas have helped you in your current role as you prepare for Tokyo?
Yeah, I've been around the place all right now. That's one way of describing it. I started out doing an undergraduate in sport and exercise science in UL. I graduated from that in 2009. And as part of that, I went on work experience to New Zealand, working with a rugby club out there, Counties Manukau Rugby, for 6 months, and that kind of ignited my interest in strength and conditioning and that side of things. I went on, I ended up doing a master's in sport and health sciences in Exeter for a year, where I had kind of crossed over to the dark side to some extent and thought that I'd be better off pursuing the idea of exercise as medicine kind of approach to things. And off the back of that, worked as a personal trainer for a while in Belfast. But then I soon realised that just wasn't really my main interest, and kind of all the while I had maintained a bit of a hand in S&C with doing the likes of the NSCA qualifications and starting into the UKCA workshops and those types of things. And really when I started doing the UKCA qualification, and that's when I really realised that no, this is definitely the avenue I needed to pursue. So I ended up then going over to England and getting taken on a part-time unpaid internship at Coventry University. That was back in 2012, I think it was just after the Olympics in 2012. And I was, in a lot of ways, it was kind of the right place at the right time, because even though it was a part-time unpaid post, one of their part-time paid positions came up around the same time that I started. So I ended up working full-time and being paid for part of that time. A couple of months later, I eventually moved into a full-time paid position in there. And I just kind of snowballed from there. So when I was at Coventry, I worked across loads and loads of different sports. It was the first time I was introduced to para sport, right? And I worked with wheelchair rugby over there. The guy who's gone on to play at the Rio Olympics. And then I went from there into the Sports Institute Northern Ireland in 2013, and I was there for 5.5 years. And across my time at in Sinai, I worked with loads and loads of different sports. Where the big focus for the first couple of years on rowing and sailing. Sailing was something that stayed constant across my time there. Rowing was a big program for me for a couple of years, and then as we worked for a couple of years with the Irish Football Association, helping them deliver the strength and conditioning support for their elite performance pathway squad, so like the underage system there. I worked alongside Jim Agilton and his team in setting that up and delivering to that group for a few seasons. Worked with judo, trained a marathon runner for the 2014 Commonwealth Games, trained boxers, Paralympic football, loads and loads and loads of different sports. Just if you name it, over the course of those years between Sinai and Coventry, I probably had some involvement with it. And then on the side of all that, I continued to do some work within Gaelic Games. So I, as you mentioned there, I worked with Lochiel in 2015 for a season, and moved from there into Antrim hurling set up for a while, and I worked with a couple of football clubs around County Down as well in that time, and did a year with the Down under 20 footballers, and then in 2017 I suppose I started working with swimming through Sinai. So I was delivering support to the Northern Irish athletes that were nominated at that time. And then in 2018, the guy looking after the national setup in Dublin, he left, and I got an opportunity to take up my current posting, which is fancy title of Associate Head of Performance Services Physical with Swim Ireland. But essentially, I'm essentially the head of physical prep, and actually my job title will change now post this Olympic Games to head of physical preparation. So that's where I'm at now at the minute.
Quite a varied background. A couple of things just to touch on there first. You said, this actually really ties in with the chat we had last week with Rob Pacey. It hasn't come out yet, so you haven't heard it, but anyone listening at home will have, I hope. How so many jobs come from doing the internship, or it's very rare someone applies for a job and gets it. You're there, you're doing a few hours, and suddenly you start getting paid for a few of those hours. That grows into a real job, and from that real job you then get communications experience that lead to a better paid job somewhere else. Is that kind of how you found a lot of, there was kind of like a snowball effect there? You rolled into the next job, and brought the experience from the previous one with you. Yeah,
that's very true. Like I suppose it in one sense you could say that I've been lucky in being in the right place at the right time or whatever, but I look at it more as being I worked hard, and that hard work put me in the places where luck could find me, and that's definitely what happened at Coventry and with the Sinai role, because the Sinai role came up at just the right point in my time at Coventry, and I got an opportunity to interview for that post at just the right time, and maybe the level of competition just wasn't particularly high with the job they advertised that time. But you are right. It just snowballed with one piece into the other, and that's highlighted, I suppose, with how I've ended up in my role currently, in that the people involved in the national programme, so the head coach and the national performance director, and that saw the work that I was doing with the athletes in the north, liked what they saw, I guess, and here I am.
Now, I find the same. The harder I work, the luckier I get. So you're probably creating a lot of your own luck there. Just growing up, what was your main sport? Like you work predominantly with swimmers now. Were you a swimmer growing up, or what was your own kind of sport?
Yeah, like completely coincidentally, I did swim. Swimming was probably the main sport that I engaged in when I was growing up. I say that I was a swimmer, and I use that term very loosely when I compare it to what I'm working with now and what I see these guys are doing. Like I would have trained 3 or 4 days a week, and my coach would have been pulling his hair out trying to get me to show up to that 4th or 5th session a week, to be honest with you. But because I suppose my main sports were Gaelic football and swimming. I loved football, but was absolutely rubbish at it. And I didn't particularly love swimming, but I was
Like Damien.
kind of okay at it. I definitely think Damien's on a different stratosphere to me anyway. But like if I had actually committed to the swimming in a more meaningful way, I could have been okay. Do you know what I mean? Instead of being the decidedly average kind of regional level swimmer that I was.
Is there much crossover between the two? Like, we often, we try and encourage here a good bit, multi-sport backgrounds and all like that. But the transfer from swimming to Gaelic football and Gaelic football to swimming, is there a whole pile?
I don't think so. No, like if you consider the specificity of adaptation that you get from a particular type of training, I certainly always found that no matter how fit I got in the pool, it never helped me when April rolled around and I was out having to run laps with the football team. And vice versa, do you know what I mean? So there's not a huge pile of crossover there. Like there's some benefit, I think, to using, water immersion or kind of aqua jogging as a support to some other components of training, but you're not going to get any specific positive adaptations from a football perspective by being in the pool and vice versa. I don't think.
A girl in school, she's a very decent swimmer, and we do a couch to 5k with 50ers, and it absolutely kills her. Like, she can't cope at all, just because she's not used to using her legs to like bear weight or anything like that. Even like, internally, cardiovascular, she's very fit. She's just not used to it, having that kind of blood flow to her legs and using the muscles in the same way as opposed to using her arms predominantly. Yeah, to touch on your current role, strength and conditioning or physical preparation in swimming, why is that useful? Like, we would think that, okay, they push a little bit off the wall, so you probably need some little bit of power in your legs, but then your arms doing the majority of the work. Probably need to be really strong around the shoulders and through the lats. Are you largely focused on those specific movements and strengthening up them, or are you looking at kind of more of a broader picture to support kind of development of an athlete so they can, in part, cope with the demands of swimming, but also make sure you're evening out the imbalances that are likely to develop from constantly just that internal rotate position pulling down all the time?
Yeah, so there's kind of a combination of all the things that you've touched on there. The way I would describe it is that there's kind of three main areas of benefit for swimmers from doing dryland training, as they refer to it, or an S&C program, as most of us would know it. And the three areas would be in terms of your swimming velocity, your start and turns, and your injury profile. And so, like, if you just take swimming velocity as a starting point, like, swimming velocity is a product of stroke length and stroke rate, and by getting stronger, you're trying to improve those factors. Now, the research at the minute is a little bit iffy in terms of its the impact of strength training on stroke length per se, but the research has shown the inclusion of strength training does have an impact on the energy costs of swimming. So then you can, for every stroke you take, you can do less work, so you can maintain that distance per stroke to a better extent than you might do otherwise. For me, there hasn't been a really strong, clear relationship indicated between the specific factors of stroke length, stroke rate, and strength. But there is a fairly clear relationship between being stronger and being faster. So what I think is going on there is, just by being stronger, you're increasing the degrees of freedom that a swimmer has to play with, and so they can then manipulate their stroke length or stroke rate depending on the context within which they're executing their swim. So whether that be the last K of a 7K session, or whether it be in the middle of a 100-meter sprint in the pool, they have the capacity to manipulate their body to execute the task at hand because they're stronger and they're in better shape as a result of it. The other part then, as I mentioned, is your starts and turns. And, like, very simply and very basically, the start and the turn are essentially jumps. jumps the same as we would know them, because it's the only part of the race where you're in contact with dry land and with a solid surface, and you literally just have to hit that surface and push off, or create pre-tension and go from the block. And so, like, we already know the relationship that exists between strength and power variables and jumping performance. It's the same thing there. So improving your strength and power indicates improvements in starting performance. And there's a much bigger body of research that is demonstrating that relationship within swimming. And it's obvious because, like from a sports scientist or from a strength and conditioning researcher's perspective, it's an easier relationship to investigate. There's less variables to deal with than there is in terms of swimming velocity, etc. And so naturally there's more research in that area. And even internally, we've run some numbers in terms of jumping performance on the day of racing and their time to 15, which is what we use as a marker of start performance. So that's the time from the initiation of the signal to their to the point at which they reach the 15-meter mark. And we've seen strong relationships with basically like the stronger, more powerful guys are better to 15 meters, and that relationship holds up better in the shorter events. So in the events where that time to 15 is more important, that strength power relationship becomes more significant, if that makes sense.
Just two things to dig into there. The first one around the just being stronger. Is that similar to like running economy in a marathon runner or a 10k runner, and that by being stronger it may not make you more aerobically fit, but just because you're more efficient in your movement the whole time? It's probably a similar concept going on there in swimmers, is it?
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly it. Like the paper, there's one paper in particular that I'm referring to there when I talk about that, and it's one by Berryman et al. From 2018, Strength Training for Middle and Long Distance Performance, a meta-analysis. And it, just to be clear as well, I don't have that learnt off the top of my head. I have it up here on the screen in front of me, but I
can see you reading it.
that paper looked at the relationship between strength training and performance in a bunch of different long distance events, including swimming, long distance running, cross country skiing, etc. And that correlation, that relationship holds steady across all of those sports. So yeah, you are right.
And on the time to 15 then, is that largely once a swimmer has dived in and does the bit of a, I don't even know what it's called, I know so little about swimming, a bit of a float or a dolphin underneath, is around 15 metres when they actually start into the stroke and using their arms? Is that kind of where the 15 metres would be the general start of that action?
Yeah, so the 15 metre mark is the point at which the athlete has to have surfaced. So the rules of the sport is you can't continue that dolphin kick beyond the 15 metre mark. So roughly speaking, if you're watching the Olympics later on this year, it'll roughly speaking be where they meet the top of the water. Some of them will come up just slightly before it. Some of them will come up absolutely bang on it, depending on their ability or their stroke or whatever. But roughly speaking, yeah, about that.
So does that lean more towards I suppose maybe it's down to the individual trying to get more airtime before entering the water, or like or how does it, like, how do athletes kind of gauge that point of where they actually enter the water to start that, as Murph said, that kind of flip up towards that 15 meter mark? Which kind of, I suppose, which area do swimmers tend to kind of try to maximize there in that 15 meters?
Yeah, so they're trying to maximize what's going on in the water more often than not, and they have to find a balance in terms of their entry that doesn't leave them too deep in the water, and therefore having to come up at a sharper angle, or have to spend more time surfacing, if that makes sense. So if you literally draw a line from their lowest point in the water to their surface point, if that's too long, then you're losing time to the opposition, to the competition. And so I will hear from time to time an athlete talk about how they entered at too deep an angle, or they found themselves just too far under the water before coming up, and it cost them, and it set them back a little bit in terms of their strategy for the day. So it's about trying to get the trajectory right and appropriate for their own needs, and try and get there as quickly as they can. So they're trying to get from block to entry quickly, and from entry to surface quickly, essentially.
You mentioned it as well, you're looking at enhancing the injury profile of swimmers. Where do swimmers tend to be, in a way, overdeveloped or potentially develop overuse injuries, and where do they tend to be weak, that you're also just, for general health, have an eye to, that's the area we probably need to straighten up a bit, just for longevity as much as that else?
Yeah, so it'll probably come as no surprise that the most prevalent area for injury is the shoulder, because the nature of the sport is that they're primarily reliant on their upper limbs to propel themselves forward, and the amount of mileage, the amount of hours that they do lends itself to injury risk in that area. Like, you can have swimmers doing 20 hours a week, 20 plus hours a week in the water. So I've seen, so during lockdown last year, we had some presentations from coaches from around the world, and I remember one in particular, a coach who had worked with a Spanish long distance swimmer. I actually can't even remember what event she did. She mightn't even have been particularly long distance, but anyway, she would have been doing massive mileages in a week of 70, 80, 100k a week. So you can imagine the stress that puts on the shoulder joint. And so that's the number one area. So you've got to be strong in the shoulder joint just to avoid injury. You've got to move well through the shoulder to avoid injury. Plus, you need to be strong through the shoulder joint to be effective, in the things that I just detailed around stroke length and stroke rate. Other areas then, let's say breaststrokers might pick up injuries around the knee. A lot of swimmers will need to be stable and strong through the lumbar spine, so lower back. Because again, the positions that they're in and the nature of that dolphin kick, that underwater, can put a fair degree of stress on that area if you're not looking after it, if you're not building good stability and control through those areas.
And just because they're spending so much time swimming and not as much time actually, load bearing through their legs, do you have to be conscious then of developing a bit of leg strength, or is that kind of tied into the work you're doing for the pushing off the wall, the diving and off the blocks, everything that way?
Well, I mean, it all ties in together, doesn't it really? But yes, absolutely, because they spend so long in a suspended environment, the swimmers don't tend to have a particularly high level of competence on dry land. So we all know inherently what the concept of athleticism is, right? It can be difficult enough to pinpoint the details of it, but if you consider in your mind's eye footballers or any type of athlete that you would regard as being athletic, it's unlikely that any of the swimmers I work with would meet that same level of athleticism, that same standard, right? And that's purely because of the environment that they execute their task in. And also, I suppose, because the sport itself self-selects athletes that tend to have slightly more unusual proportions. So they'll have longer arms and longer legs, depending on the event that they're going for. So like a big part of any of the program for me is about making sure that they move really well, and learn to move well on dry land, in order to, and that will feed into the injury prevention component in and of itself before you consider any strength component. And then you're trying to layer strength and power on top of that. So like my philosophy around athletic development or physical preparation is move better, be stronger. And those two concepts then obviously are context dependent in terms of what they look like when you really drill into the detail of them. But first and foremost, they have to move well. So in my experience with swimmers, they don't tend to be especially strong or produce force especially well through the lower limbs, because they're not asked to do it that much in their sport, and because they live in a suspended environment. So what I would have found in working with a number of swimmers over the years is that I had to kind of bias the training a little bit more towards lower limb strength and power than might make sense for the sport. But we needed to get that up to a better standard, so that we could kind of tick that box to some extent, and so that we could be sure that was of a sufficient standard to allow them to be able to, to be good off the blocks and be good around the walls. Because there are two areas that are they are low hanging fruit when it comes to looking after these guys.
I suppose with that in mind, then with how the swimming season actually runs, how do you periodize your approach to managing that so that it's not going to, obviously, like anything, you're focusing towards a particular part of the year where the season is peak and you want athletes to be peaking, but is this something that you purely kind of focus on in more of an off-season type part of the year, or is it something that you use continuously, especially when you say that lads could be in the water for 20 hours depending on their event and all that during the week? How do you work it in around just the normal season, or is it more focused off season?
So I would try and do it the whole season along would be the first thing. But how that looks and the ebb and the flow of the volumes and the intensities will obviously alter as the season progresses. So I suppose the beauty of working in a sport like swimming is that there tends to be three very clear peak points in the season. So you have your period, your season normally starts kind of middle to end of August, or maybe starts in September, and we'll have a peak just before Christmas. So you have your short course season, so your 25 metre season up until Christmas, and there's a peak then in kind of December time with, in the context I work in, that peak is normally a European or World Short Course Championships and or an Irish Short Course Championships, right? So depending on the level of the athlete. Then you have a peak into your trial event or your national championships sometime in April-ish. And that's normally the trial for selecting our national teams for the summer competitions. And there is normally a peak summer competition. So in a normal season, you would have either a European champs, a world champs, or an Olympic Games, right? In an Olympic season, you'll have a European champs and the Olympics, but the European champs usually is the secondary competition in that circumstance, right? There's caveats to all of that depending on circumstances, but by and large, for most people, you're then trying to peak into the summer, right? So that then means that you have three distinct preparation cycles or performance cycles, and you can kind of follow a reasonably traditional periodization approach to that process. So you can focus on your volume and your development in the early part of the training cycle, and then you taper that off into more strength power based stuff, and then you taper that off into a taper for the competition. Now, it rarely runs quite as smooth as that, but by and large, you can reasonably well conceptualize the season in that manner. What we will try and do with the athletes that we work with on a day-to-day basis in the National Centre in Dublin here, myself and the swimming coach will try and identify periods within any training cycle where we can emphasise one thing over another. So the best and most recent example I can give of that would have been the training cycle from Christmas of this year through to our Olympic trials, where we had, I can't remember now off the top of my head whether it was 12 weeks or 14 weeks, but it was something like that. And the swimming coach was basically able to say to me, right, we've got 6 weeks here to do what we need to do in terms of forcing physical adaptations, particularly around dry land. So let's focus on that in that period. And we'll still need to do volumes in the pool, but I can tailor the intensities in the pool to make sure that they're able to optimize their effort in the gym, right? But then once that 6-week period is over, the flip needs to happen, because the focus and the quality needs to be what's going on in the pool. I still need to do quality work within the gym, but the volumes, the intensities, the nature of the exercise selection will alter in order to make to minimize any negative carryover into the pool. But all the while, at all stages along this, you're trying to make sure that the athlete's physiology is being stimulated in a manner that's going to help produce a positive outcome at the end of the performance cycle.
When you're in a stage there of maintenance and you're saying you're dropping intensity, it's still going to be probably a relative drop, because if you've spent 6 weeks bringing up their strength, like that relative lower load now is probably where like it was a higher intensity before you started that 6-week block. So it's probably, they're still working that little bit harder externally, but internally it's come down a bit just from the fact of getting stronger. So it's easier then to maintain it and support more of a focus on working the pool as opposed to in the gym.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was first off, I'm always loath to use the idea of maintenance, because it's not just about. We're always still trying to push on. We're always trying to develop something, but it just may not be, maximum strength or hypertrophy that requires massive loads and massive volumes, if that makes sense. But yes, you are right in that it's always a relative drop in volumes and intensities and whatnot.
When it comes to then like a week of training, how many strength sessions are swimmers doing per week, or how much access do you have to them? And even then, like, go as far as what does a typical week look like? Because I assume you probably have a reasonably similar week-to-week schedule. You're just altering the makeup of each individual session as opposed to completely flip it around the amount of sessions of each type of thing you're doing.
Correct, yeah. So for the most part, 2 gym sessions, 2 gym units is our baseline, right? With the exception to that being competition weeks or regen weeks or weeks like that, weeks that are out of the ordinary. Depending on the needs of the athlete, that may go up to 3 gym units in a week. But in the time that I've worked here, I don't recall ever going to 4 units. We had a couple of instances maybe where we went to 4 units, but 5 units, but those units would have included some dryland conditioning work. Yeah, so in some instances you might go to 4 or 5 or whatever units per week, but mixed into there would be some dryland conditioning work. And there's a couple of different reasons as to why we might choose to do that. But by and large, it's 2 or 3, right? And so a typical week, if you look at our phase of training here since after Europeans, everybody was swim Monday morning and gym afterwards. Those 2 units tend to be very, very consistent. They almost never change. In terms of the fact that they are on the schedule. Swim Monday afternoon. That swim can sometimes get dropped off during a taper, but you're on a normal Monday. You're talking swim, gym, swim. Tuesday is swim, so morning and evening. Wednesday, swim, gym. Right, and then there's a 36-hour break to Thursday afternoon swim. Then you'll have Friday is swim, and depending on circumstances and individual needs, it may be swim, gym, swim. Right, and then Saturday morning is swim. So you have, I actually can't even remember how many swimming units is that. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You have up to 9 swimming units in the week. and maybe 3 gym units in the week. You notice I keep calling them units. So like our coach is big on the idea that every training session is just another unit of training there, because it's too easy to fall into the trap of separating the two things out and not considering the interplay between the two and the impact that one has on the other. And so it's very important to see all of this as just another training unit and another part of that training program and that training plan. And that it's that concept and that philosophy that allows us to manipulate the number of units that somebody might be doing in a given week and the placement of those units. So the weekly schedule I just outlined to you there, would have had the gym on Monday, Wednesday, Friday mornings after their morning swim. But in certain circumstances, we might go Monday, Thursday. So we might go Monday morning after the morning swim, and we might go Thursday afternoon just before their afternoon swim. Or you could there has been circumstances where we've gone Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Monday, Thursday, Friday, depending on the intended outcome of the sessions and the intended needs of the athlete.
And in terms of like key exercise and stuff, is it similar to like a gym session or a strength session you do with the majority of athletes? You're getting your squat in, you're getting your press in. I assume like their pulling strength upper body is fairly sick compared to your average athlete, but otherwise just maybe some shoulder external rotation work then, because it is probably an area that you need to be very mindful of with swimmers. Are there any kind of key exercise you would start to include more so for swimmers that wouldn't be in a traditional program? And on the flip side, are there some that you wouldn't include at all that you would in a lot of kind of traditional programs?
No, and like I suppose for me, the cornerstone of an S&C program for swimming is squat, bench, chins. Right, they are the three cornerstones of any S&C program for swimming, because they're the three that correlate to performance. Right, so you're stronger, better squats, better jumps, right? So better execution off the block and better execution on the walls, right? Better chins and bench, better upper body function and better stroke length, stroke rate. They're fundamentally it comes down to improving those three factors, right? Then everything else then kind of falls in around that and supporting factors related to that or related to other biomechanical outputs. So I like using the Olympic weightlifting movements and derivatives, so I'll use them as well to help with the development of kind of whole body strength and things like concentric impulse and factors related to jump performance in that manner. And then you're using single leg work in order to support the development of your squat. You're using single leg work because ultimately they actually push off of one leg when they're diving in off the block, and because coming back again to their kind of reasonably low levels of dryland athleticism, being able to execute on one leg is not something that swimmers tend to be very good at. So if you can improve that, you're just improving their all-around athleticism as well. Then you're doing some posterior chain focused work. Like I will use Nordics as an example, just to create balance around the knee and around the hip. And then for your upper body supplementary work, you're doing a lot of horizontal pulling work and a lot of external rotation dominated work. So if you think like the movement of a swimming stroke is very much an internal rotation dominated movement pattern, and the force production occurs in an through internal rotation. Hence, bench and chins become so important because they are also dominated by those big internal rotators, the likes of your lats, etc. So you want to do a lot of work that biases towards external rotation in order to protect the shoulder. And so when it comes to protecting that shoulder joint, for me, it's about just getting reps and time under tension in external rotation dominated movement patterns. So like I'll tend to prescribe like what I term shoulder saver work in every single session without fail. What I've moved towards in the back end of this season is putting that into their warm-up and I might, depending on the structure of the session, I might drip it into the main body of the session as well. Or I will make a point of including a horizontal pull as part of their upper body accessory work. When I'm prescribing those shoulder saver exercises, I tend to prescribe according to reps and to weight. So like external rotation work, or lying blackbird exercises, that kind of thing, according to reps. But Lorna Barry, who's our S&C coach in the National Centre in Limerick, who's doing her PhD looking at the impact of training load on shoulder health and whatnot in swimmers, what she does really, really well is she'll prescribe that same work based on time. So she'll get them to execute a given exercise for prolonged periods of time and accumulate the workload that way, which is a really nice way of doing it too. So yeah, we would include a lot of just external rotation dominated and biased work in order to protect that shoulder joint.
I saw one of the swimmers was on Kate McDade, NutriKate's Instagram story there a few weeks ago, and had a few pictures of you up there. Oh, there's the man Paul Talty making us do all this band work before he even lets us into the pool. I assume that's just like developing that shoulder health again.
Yeah. That was Robbie. Robbie was on that a few weeks ago. All right, I forgot to go back and actually have a look at what he put up. So hopefully it was good stuff. But yeah, I'd say they're fairly sick of me hammering on about that stuff, to be honest.
With the jumps, and I know you're focusing very much in on, say, the squat there with that, but if you jump into the pool, but then your turn in the pool off the wall, the resistance in both of those is obviously very different. You're in the water, you're not in the water. Would you like incorporate anything then to try and, build power, like say squat jumps or hex bar weighted jumps, to try and help improve that power into the resistance while in the water? Or do you just kind of, try and train the power through the squat and have it applied to both jumps? Do you do much specificity there around the two different types of push off?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, that was probably something I kind of overlooked in what I detailed there a second ago. It absolutely, like we do lots and lots of jumps, like we do lots of different types of jumps, in terms of like squat jumps, counter movement jumps, all that kind of stuff, in terms of adding load. So like barbell jumps. Something I started doing, I'm putting a lot more emphasis on this year, was almost like kind of multi jump work or plyometric work. I'm reluctant to use the term plyometric because I'm not sure how plyometric exactly any of our guys really are, but it was trying to build, I suppose there was definitely a component of athleticism. So what I found was when I started introducing things like pogo hops and hopping in different directions and that kind of thing, like they were really poor at it, and their function at their ankle joint in particular was really poor. But again, it's something that they would never have been challenged to do previously. And so I said, right, let's just go down this rabbit hole a little bit this season and see what it brings about for us. And so we've done an awful lot more of kind of reactive type jumps, whether it be pogo jumps progressing to hurdle hops, and we even did depth drops and drop jumps and that kind of thing a good bit in the run into trials. And even though the sport itself doesn't require an awful lot of in terms of a stretch, short, and a cycle, and it doesn't necessitate those kind of rapid reactive actions like dryland sports will do. What I have found is that they've all responded really well to it, and it has supported a lot of the other things that we would chase on. So like just their jumping ability has improved. So yeah, the most simple answer to your question there is yes. We do all of that stuff. I said earlier on that I like to use the Olympic lifts and their derivatives, but we don't use them for everybody because, for a multitude of reasons, it just may not suit a training cycle or a given athlete, and so we will put more emphasis on variations of loaded jumps and that type of thing across the week. Also, coming back to the point earlier on around how you manage your loads across the training cycle. As you come in closer to your competition, you're still achieving a central nervous stimulus without creating an excessive level of fatigue. by doing things like manipulating the loads or the ranges of your squats, but you're still maintaining your intensity through your jumps, and some loaded jumps and that kind of thing.
I know we'll touch a nice bit on some of that kind of reactive strength and stuff as we look into your PhD research as we go on. Just something you mentioned there at one of Damien's earlier questions around, you were chatting to the swim coaches around managing load across the week, how they're all units, they all feed into training. How much communication do you have with the swim coaches? And like, what is that mainly focused around in terms of load? Are you ever like, if a swim coach is focusing particularly hard on adapting a swimmer's technique, do you need to pull back a bit on some elements of strength, or will developing some elements of strength help that develop? Or other general areas for improvement around what is most useful or appropriate for a swimmer at a particular time?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So the single biggest difference between my current role and previous roles is the fact that I'm embedded full time within the sport here. So like I'm working alongside the coaches day in, day out, all the time. And so one of the things that we do work quite hard on is creating synergy between what's going on in the pool and what's going on in the gym, and making sure that they complement each other as best as possible. So because the routine in the week is reasonably consistent, I know the Monday morning swim session is a nice easy session. So in terms of the conflict between what he's trying to achieve there and what I am going to achieve in the gym, we don't need to have extensive conversations week to week or cycle to cycle in terms of what's going to happen on Monday morning, because he's not going to be excessive and it gives me space to do stuff, and I'm not going to absolutely, I'm not going to absolutely destroy them for Monday afternoon, but at the same time, the Monday afternoon session is not a key session per se either, so I can afford to load them pretty heavily in the Monday morning. Similarly, on a Wednesday, I know that by and large that session can be a little bit more demanding of the swimmer, but reasonably rarely does it become so demanding that it's going to take away from what I intend to do on a Wednesday morning. If I think that it might, we will have conversations around certain, we'll say at the start of a training cycle, not even a training cycle, I suppose a training block, where we'll discuss what the intention will be for the coming period of time, and we may make decisions at that point around, right, well, I'll tell you what, let's move our Wednesday morning gym session to Thursday afternoon, because I want to do some speed work with them in the middle of the week, and it'll fit in really well with the speed session you do in the pool Thursday afternoon. And so, we might do things that way. So we'll have those types of conversations. Ultimately, the swim coach will dictate what the training program looks like to a massive degree, and that's made it a little bit easier with the guy that I work with here, Ben Higson, because Ben is he has a really strong grasp on how different types of strength training impact on the what's going on in the pool. That comes from the fact that Ben trains a lot. He lifts a lot. So it's just an interest for him. So he knows that if we're doing a max strength block of work, he can't. There are certain types of training within the pool that he needs to hold back on, because if he doesn't, number one, we won't get the adaptation in the gym we're looking for, and number two, if we both go at those kind of power type, high nervous system output type intentions in that block, it can end up imbalancing the physiology of the athlete to a greater degree than he wants. Okay, now when he gets into those conversations, I have to admit I start to get a little bit lost, right? Because he follows this physiological model called the Jan Olbrecht model, and the finer detail of it, he's really, really good at kind of understanding how the balance of the training week will impact on the physiological outcomes that himself and Jan will look for. I'm just in charge of getting guys to pick things up and put them back down again. So that conversation can go over my head a small bit at times. But ultimately we will work to make sure that there's a balance there in terms of physiological outcomes. In terms of technical outcomes, there has been instances over the last couple of years where Ben will come to me and like, I can't get X athlete to do this particular piece in the pool on a consistent basis, or I can't get X athlete to be able to complete a certain amount of mileage in the pool in a week because they're too weak. So I can you make that better? Or there's been an instance where I can't get a given athlete to really tap into their really high-end power output, that component of their physiology. I need you to support that in the gym. And so that might look like real power output work in the gym. It could be power output on an erg, such as a ski erg or whatever, to help them, to just give them a slightly different stimulus to try and tap into that high-end outputs in order to support what's going on in the pool. And so we'll kind of have those types of conversations and try and match up what we're doing on that basis.
And I suppose we've been very focused there on the training side of things, but from, I suppose, a recovery side of things, with the kind of schedule you listed out, recovery is obviously, it's obviously huge in every sport, but with that kind of a weekly schedule, how do you, and I suppose in camp, how is recovery kind of programmed in for the lads? Is there any particular types of recovery that you promote more so from a swim perspective than maybe you would from a field sport or a dry land sport perspective?
So the first thing I suppose about the weekly schedule is that, as I mentioned there's a 36-hour break in the middle of the week. So that's the first part where recovery is literally programmed into the schedule. So there, for example, like we will gym straight after the swim on the Wednesday, and then nothing until Thursday afternoon. And for that reason, we actually don't do. So I mentioned before that sometimes we'll do a gym on a unit on Thursday afternoon sometimes. So we try not to make that a normal part of what we do, because we want to extend that break into the Thursday afternoon swim. So that's the first thing. The second thing is programming the swimming sessions to promote recovery within them. So, for example, a Friday morning swim is usually something in the region of about 5k, and it's in what they refer to as AAC 1, so aerobic capacity 1. So it's your level 1 stuff. It's just long, slow, steady work, right? And that will promote recovery for the athlete. What you will find with swimmers in particular, and this was something that I didn't kind of get quite just fully until I started working in it for a while full time, is that if you take them out of the water for too long, they lose their feel, and getting them back into the water becomes a bigger chore at that point than it does in getting them back into the water within a reasonable window of time. And getting them back into the water within that window of time will help promote recovery. Obviously, you negate that if you go too long. If you spend that Friday morning session becomes a 7k session, then for a 200 meter swimmer or 100 meter swimmer, that's probably a little bit excessive. But that's part of the promotion of recovery and adaptation. Outside of that, then we will put a lot of emphasis on making sure that their nutrition is right, and making sure that they're eating enough. So the nutritionist here at the Sport Ireland Institute, in the case of the guys in the National Centre in Dublin, the nutritionist in the Sport Northern Ireland Sports Institute for the guys up there, and we have a nutritionist working with the athletes in the National Centre in Limerick. We'll all work with them on as individual basis as they can to make sure that they're consuming the right amounts of food first and foremost, and then at the right time and in the right way. So as you can imagine, like the calorie intake of these guys is pretty big, and in a lot of instances, when they haven't had the support around that previously, the calorie intakes maybe aren't as big as they need to be. Sometimes they can underestimate just how much they need to take in.
Sorry, I was going to ask just a quick question on that. Do you find a lot of people coming into that atmosphere from, say, outside the Ireland setup, when they first come in, there'd be a massive calorie difference in what I suppose normal people would consume as compared to what like an active top level swimmer would consume, that they just don't know about it, but they just underestimate it hugely?
I wouldn't say that it's necessarily massive. So in terms of the athletes that come into us in the national centre, they tend to already be operating at a reasonably decent level from a national perspective, and so just to get there, they'll have been eating quite a bit anyway. But I would say that 8 or 9 times out of 10, there's still another little bit that they need to do. Now, quite often it's around timing as much as it is around volumes of food. So we've one athlete at the minute who's working with a nutritionist around supporting their training at the back end of the week. So they were finding that by the time Friday and Saturday was coming around, they just didn't feel like that they had the same energy that they needed to in order to finish out the week, really positively. And so when the nutritionist worked with that particular athlete, they found that they were maybe not optimizing what they were doing around the really heavy days at the start of the week, which was then having a cumulative effect by the back end of the week. So making actually relatively small tweaks to their nutrition can have big impacts. And so what I have found is once you can get into the detail around nutrition and the recovery and that kind of thing, you can really start to see some really significant changes in their adaptations. So the best example of that was one athlete who in my first season was still a full-time school student. I think they were in their leaving cert year that year, but they were in school a couple of counties away. You know what I mean? So they were spending a couple of hours a day in the car in order to spend a couple of hours a day in the pool, while still having a full school day and still getting their homework done. Now they did well, progressed on that season. The following year, when they were able to move to Dublin on a full-time basis, the rate of progression in the first couple of months was massive, because that recovery was much more heavily promoted, and there was just really good work around the nutrition. And you see that all the time. There was another athlete who, although they were living in Dublin, they were full-time in school, and so they were having to battle through the traffic all the time in order to get between school and training. And once that component changed for them, and they were able to reduce their academic commitments, the rate of progression just changes the game completely.
I see a student in school I mentioned earlier on, I think she said she's between 5 and 8% of Olympic swim time. She was allowed back into the pool when pools were closed there for a couple of months beforehand. But she said come summertime, because she swims in the morning, goes to school for the day, swims in the afternoon, does homework. When summertime comes, she's just able to nap for 2 hours in the middle of every day, and she just notices that month of June every year she just improves so much quicker, because she soaked up the training volume for the previous few weeks or previous few months and has soaked it up, and then when she gets that chance to do the extra recovery, she just really realises it in the pool with her times going up and tries then. She said it works out reasonably well for some competitions, but when you're coming up to Christmas test, come to summer test 2 years ago, and she was coming up to junior start, you can really notice the extra fatigue setting in, whereas Summer said, it's just a dream. She's pretty much a professional athlete. She spends her morning swimming, napping, eating, swimming, eating, sleeping.
Absolutely, and I'd even bring it back to 2013 when I started working in Sinai, and I was working with the rowing squad, and they were all school age at the time, and I wouldn't have had a huge amount of experience at that stage of training athletes that were that age and doing exams. And I remember that first summer, it might have been the Christmas exams, I can't remember, but it was around exam time for them anyway, and they were just crap all of a sudden. Do you know what I mean? In the gym, they just couldn't do it, and of course, obviously, their exams and the added stress around it. So me and the rowing coach at the time worked to plan out. We over the couple of seasons I worked with them, we worked really hard to always plan in advance where their exams were, as in where in the timeline they were, and adjust their training around that. So that there was one athlete in particular, I remember I made a big downward adjustment to their load in the gym during their exam time, and then but they PB'd. They absolutely smashed the hell out of it the week after their exams, because we supported their ability to focus the stress into their exams and get over that, and then they were able to come out the other side in a really positive way, instead of that first exam period that I worked in, and we got a couple of people with colds and that kind of thing off the back of them. So yeah, absolutely, like appreciating the stress that your student athlete is under and adjusting accordingly is absolutely critical.
And what's like buy-in like in terms of swimmers and gym work? Like you think of, say, your background swimming and football. Like for football, it's well established now. You will obviously have the few saying, "Oh, they shouldn't be in the gym; they'll get too slow" and stuff like that. But in general, most field sport athletes now appreciate the benefits that gym work has. Is it as commonplace, or is it as well accepted in swimming? Or have you noticed some athletes as they come into the institute up in Dublin where you're based, like, why am I going to the gym? I should be spending more time in the pool. Is that something you have to battle with?
For the most part, it's pretty well established, I suppose. Like I was very, very lucky in that my predecessor, John Watson, he had done a lot of really good work in establishing the basis of the importance of getting stronger and more powerful. And we have a head coach who absolutely believes in the importance of a strength and conditioning program supplementing the swimming program. I suppose where you can get kind of a little bit of pushback sometimes is around the specific details at particular times of the season. So, for example, we will continue to push the gym work right up to the competition time, and so you'll still get some people who are a little bit iffy about doing too much in that taper period. And even the more experienced guys can get a little bit edgy when it's coming to taper. If they're not feeling as fresh as they feel like they should be feeling or whatever. But you're just trying, it's that thing of hold the line, like just for the extra week, and then bang, they feel the benefit and they go on the PB and they're all happy with themselves. But the people who are less experienced with that, and who have a process that they feel that they have always fallen back on, they can get a little bit nervous around doing too much too close to competition. I to use their own terminology, doing too much, and so that can be a little bit of an issue. But by and large, the guys we have are brilliant, and they all work really, really, really hard. In fairness to them, you know what I mean, like to a man.
On the same kind of idea as that, Paul, is it on the flip side, is it easy for them to buy into the recovery side of things? So like that 36-hour window, or is there lads that you have to literally hold back and be like, don't set foot near the gym, near the campus? No?
Not at all. 36 hours off. Can't wait. Delighted. Absolutely delighted. Would you go away? No. That's not an issue at all. No, in fairness to them, they all work so bloody hard when they're in the pool, and the volumes are such that when they get an opportunity to rest, they absolutely they're not gonna compromise that. So sometimes at certain times the year, maybe on occasion, like you might get somebody that their girlfriend drags them out for a hike or something like that on a Sunday when they should have been at home resting, but it's few and far between when that happens, in fairness.
You'd hate Damien, so he is the king of the hikes.
I think if Damien was doing the mileage that these lads are doing, I think he'd be struggling with his hikes in the weekend.
Probably, yeah.
Still be on lap one.
No, I honestly, it's hilarious when you see lads like at the end of a 50k a week and they've done 3 gym sessions and they just look like their soul is falling out of their backside, like, you know what I mean? They're just broken. They're not gonna. They just can't wait to get home, get food, and relax,
sleep. And when a new swimmer comes into the institute, like, do most of them have a foundation strength? Is there much support to kind of filter out to like the regional areas, the smaller clubs, or is it a bit of a wild west in terms of these who here, yeah, great gym setup, the local coach links in well, these here do absolutely nothing, these here do some crazy shit, and we're like, oh, how do I manage this? Because I know like the local swim club here in Ross, they do link in with a local gym. I think on average it seems to be quite good. Now that current school did say to me one time, oh, I'm so tired after the assault bike last night. I was like, surely you don't need an assault bike. Your condition is fairly looked after. Like it's just a focus on strength. But in general, it's a bit of a mix and match coming from different parts. You don't need to name anywhere or call it out like that, but just in general, what's it?
No.
Or do.
Yeah,
or
look,
do.
it's or do. Look, it's a bit of a mix and match. Look, at the end of the day, the clubs are they have to operate on a self-sufficient basis. The unfortunate reality that we live in is that we, like so many Olympic sports, are very tight on funding, and the amount of money that is available to club setups is like, most of them are struggling from a financial perspective. So in the vast majority of cases, they can't afford to, we'll say, to have an in-house S&C coach like a lot of, say, GAA clubs might. And most of them, I'd say 99% of them don't have access to their own gym facility. I can actually only think of, there's only one club that springs to mind that has its own gym that I can think of. And so, like, what you find there's a lot of is it's up to the individual swimmer to take it upon themselves to source S&C support for themselves. And that's just an unfortunate reality of the way that that so many Olympic sports are structured and funded in Ireland. Even within our own setup, like, we would love to be in a position where we would have an S&C coach whose responsibility lies with looking after, kind of regional groups or club athletes or that kind of thing, but we just don't have the resource to give to that. Like, I'm a national head of performance services, but I'm also a lead S&C coach for a national centre and for national teams and that kind of thing. So even in my own role, my time is split. Whereas if you go to the GB setup, they'll have a head of performance services, then they'll have a lead S&C coach, a lead nutritionist, a lead PA, a lead whatever, and those lead roles are solely about delivering top level service support within the group they're working with, while the head of performance services can sit over the top of it and can consider the strategy, etc. Whereas I'm having to do a mix of both of those roles.
And one of the last things we'll touch on then is just the general prep for Tokyo. Like, you're heading off there in, did you say about a month's time? So, you were saying at the start, you have your big long to-do list there on the whiteboard behind you. Just slow it. I don't see much ticked off there now, Paul. You need to get to work. But like, realistically, what's involved? I assume the Irish Olympic Federation or whatever it's called have a logistics manager or a logistics team that do a lot of the booking and stuff. But how much do you need to liaise in around there? Like, do you go onto Google Earth and look up, okay, this is where the pool is, this is where the local gym is, what is the time to get from one to the other? Can you get like a virtual tour of the gym you will have to plan out your sessions? Everything like that. What needs to be considered there?
Right, so I came into post in November 2018, right? So at that point we were 20 months away from the Olympics, I think. Is that right? When the Olympics were supposed to take place. So by then the process had already kicked off, and the holding camp had already been the location had already been identified, pool is already identified, and plans were already in place. And actually what we did in that 18-19 season, we had our World Championships were in South Korea. So what we did was we went to Japan and had our holding camp for Worlds in the same location we're doing our holding camp for the Olympics, with the intention of troubleshooting any potential snags for the Olympic Games. So a lot of that stuff was already in place, or was already in train, say. But it's a massive logistical challenge, the whole thing, and it's taken on almost entirely by the OFI. Thankfully in so many ways, but obviously it's in conjunction with each sport, so it's up to the sport then to kind of to sign off essentially on a lot of the decisions, or to at least agree with them anyway. So this year Team Ireland are having a whole team holding camp in Fukuroi City in Japan, but Fukuroi City don't have a Olympic sized swimming pool, so the swimming it was my predecessor, and I don't know if it was the head coach or the performance director, but a team of guys from Swim Ireland went out to Japan before months and months before I started, to scope out options near to Fukuroi, and so we ended up in a city called Hamamatsu, where we will stay in a hotel, and we will be bused to and from a swimming pool, which is about 15 minutes away, and there's a gym at the swimming pool. Now, the gym facility, as it turns out, is basically equipment put in the hallway outside of where the pool is, right? So which doesn't sound especially swanky. It's not swanky by any means, but it's very, very functional, and will do everything that we need to do. So there'll be squat racks, there'll be benches, and there'll be weights, and there'll be dumbbells. And we'll bring over some other stuff. In terms of the other logistics that are involved, as I say, so much of it is taken care of, thankfully, by the staff at the OFI. So the OFI will obviously have their normal full-time staff in the office, and then in the run into the games, they appointed heads of service for each service area, and there was then additional staff appointed within that context as well. So they will take a lead on ensuring that each of the individual components are in place. And my job really then is just to make sure that our normal practices for when we go to competition, and our normal processes, if they aren't already being met by the OFI, that I'm supplementing the work that they're doing to make sure that we're covering off all those relevant areas. And so Eamon Flanagan is the lead S&C coach for the OFI this year. So he would have taken a lead originally in discussions with the host city around the needs, around the S&C needs, and that would have been an area of communication between Eamon and myself, or Eamon and my predecessor in the role, right? And then, as recently we'll say as this week or last week, then it's a case of double checking the schedules to make sure that the schedules meet the needs that we have, double checking that the equipment that we want to have in place is going to be there, and then Eamon is heading out as part of an advance party. He's gone out a little bit earlier in July than I am, and he'll take a trip down to Hamamatsu to double check that everything is in place, and he'll liaise back with me before we actually arrive.
To be fair to swimming in terms of like actual equipment needed, you don't need to bring like your swimming togs, your hat and your goggles. It's not the same as bringing a boat and paddles for canoeing, a pole vault, a gun, a bike, a massive boat for the sailing. There's not as much of like a nightmare involved in terms of bringing stuff or transporting stuff as that. But like, you probably have to be very conscious. I know it's probably more on the nutritious end. You need to be very conscious of what food is available and everything, because the swimmers have such an appetite. They need to be eating an awful lot of pools. They need to be conscious then of what food do I actually have access to fill this massive hole in my belly that I keep making with all these laps in the pool.
Yeah, like that's actually another really good example. Actually, ahead of 2019, the various heads of service from the OFI would have done recce's out to Fukuroi, Hamamatsu, and Tokyo to see the venues, to talk to the relevant people, and to make sure everything was in place. Because we had the opportunity to do a dry run of our holding camp, the nutritionist from the institute, she's the lead nutritionist for Team Ireland, she had an opportunity then to discuss with the hotel and the chefs in the hotel what the food would need to look like, and we had an opportunity to basically to have a dry run of what the execution of that would look like. So with the way that aquatics championships tend to set up, diving is nearly always before swimming until you come to the Olympic Games, and they actually occur a bit closer together. But in 2019, the divers were out in Hamamatsu before the swimmers were. What they found was there was massive amounts of food being put out in front of them. But the divers don't eat as much as the swimmers do, so there's a huge amount of food being left behind. So the chefs adjusted, and then in came the savages, and there wasn't enough food for them. You know what I mean? So we had an opportunity there to just literally have a dry run of what the expectations will be around that kind of thing, and to troubleshoot that, so that hopefully when we go out this year, that won't be a problem. The chefs will be aware that they have X number of very hungry people coming to them, and they can be appropriately prepared. Yeah, sorry. Just in terms of kit, just really quickly as well. You are right in that. Like I said to you earlier that I worked for a number of years with sailing, right? And it was always entertaining watching them prepping for competitions because, again, people might be surprised to hear this, but the sailors wouldn't exactly be massively well funded either per se, right? So they will literally have to drive their boat from one side of Europe to the other for a competition.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, do they sail it around or do they put it on some big massive lorry, or how does that work?
They literally put it on. They'll put it on a trailer and drive it.
Yes.
And so the guys I worked with, there was a pair of guys on a double-hander boat called a 49er, and so depending on the competition, sometimes what they would do is one guy would stay at home and kind of handle some of the logistics of preparing, because they effectively act as their own managers as well, right? So he might be kind of planning out the logistics of what's going on, and the other guy will spend 2 days driving across the other side of Europe. And then depending on, let's say if the competition is in South America or is in Australasia or something like that, they'll stick it in the container and send it out. And in some cases, they'll do that 6 months in advance. So like if there was a World Championships out in Australia, they'd ship their number one boat 6 months in advance, and then they'll use their backup boat for competitions in the meantime. For our guys, it's a little bit more than hat and goggles, so they do have fins and a kickboard, but it's not quite the same. But what I actually found, we went to European Championships a few weeks ago, and I actually had 5 suitcases of kit with me, because we had stuff like medicine balls and strength bands and recovery pumps and some supplements and all that kind of stuff. And so from a packing perspective, that's all ahead of me now as well for the next few weeks.
Just then, because, planning a trip to the Olympics and coaching some elite level athletes who are going for medals there doesn't take up all of your time. You're researching a PhD as well in, some would say, not the most transferable to swimmers. You're looking at how gym work translate to change of direction on the Gaelic football pitch, or the general gist of that.
Yeah, I'd say if it wouldn't. I'd say most people would probably realise that when I took on this PhD, I wasn't expecting to end up working in swimming. So I registered with the University of Salford in 2018, in the middle of 2018, and 6 months later I got a job with Swim Ireland. So there you go. But yeah, the working title of what I'm doing for the PhD is Change of Direction Performance in Gaelic Football, and essentially I'm looking at the strength characteristics associated with successful change of direction performance in Gaelic football, and so I'm doing it with Paul Jones and Paul Comfort at the University of Salford, and the intended kind of process and timeline around that was to start off with a study looking at the change of direction demands of the game. So that was time motion analysis of the sport, to understand the frequency of changes of direction that occur, the type of changes of direction that occur, so like the angle type, and the execution of the movement, how the movement is actually executed. And then from there, the intention is to design a change of direction test. Once that was created and validated, get athletes to execute that test over a force plate, and do a series of strength assessments in the gym, looking at things like dynamic strength, isometric strength, eccentric strength, reactive strength, and essentially look at what relates to what. So what strength characteristics are most closely related to the kinetics associated with the execution of the turn, and then from there then look to implement a training intervention in the gym that would hopefully carry over to improved change direction performance in the sport.
Have you done the intervention yet?
No, I haven't gotten past study 1 yet. So I took 2020 was a gap year because I was supposed to have an Olympics to get ready for at the time. That obviously went really well. So I'm wrapping up study 1 at the minute. I'm writing it up, and I should have had it done 2 months ago, but trials, Europeans, and the Olympics have thrown a spanner in that particular works. So I'd be hoping to get that paper out now in the next few months.
Yeah, any questions on that change direction there, Damien? You're surely wondering about all those car forwards that change direction around you, make you dizzy.
Speak for yourself, Murph. I'm the one doing the turning. I suppose I should probably leave you finish the paper first, really, before putting you to the pin of your collar. But is there, I suppose, from what you've kind of looked at so far and where you're looking to go, is there anything? Are there any few movements specifically from the gym floor that you're kind of you're thinking or you're seeing really do impact that turn of speed, or is it still very much up in the air where you're just kind of trying to see what kind of information comes back your way?
I'm still very much trying to see what information comes back my way. But if you look at the kind of theory that underpinned the development of the concept, I suppose there's an increasing indication that isometric strength is really the critical part of that change of direction performance. I should be careful with my language there. Like the critical part of any agility performance is your perception action coupling, which I know Alan spoke about a couple of weeks ago on the podcast. But specifically in relation to the physical component element of agility, the muscle qualities that would appear to be of most importance would be isometric strength and isometric capacities. And so, like, my hypothesis, I suppose, at this point in time is that improving your yielding strength, so your ability to maintain joint angles and still produce force, will be the most important part. And you would train that through, obviously you've got isometric strength training that you can do, but in terms of real transfer, you're probably looking at a lot of like plyometric work and the ability to maintain stiff joint angles and still produce a force in an efficient manner. But of course you need an underpinning strength, kind of general strength and dynamic strength component in order to support the development of those other capacities. It's a bit of a jumbled up response there, but that's probably about as close as I can give you at the minute anyway.
It's perfect.
In terms of, let's say, that first study, like there's a huge amount of kind of man hours gone into it, and it's funny, like, because the outcome of it is actually so far is really, really simple, in that there doesn't seem to be a huge amount of difference in terms of left to right preferences for changes of direction within the cohort that I looked at. So it seems to be fairly equal demand, pretty close to 50-50 left to right, which is an interesting one. I would have expected to see a bigger bias on that one. That doesn't appear to be the case. Now, small enough sample, but still.
That's interesting. Now, I wonder, is it related to like dominant foot? Like, are most of them equally comfortable kicking off right and left to make them more?
Yeah, I've no idea. I would only surmise that it's because of the open nature of the game. Because ultimately the pitch is so big, and the nature of the different roles in the game now, like you're not as, like, a corner forward isn't stuck in the corner by any measure of means anymore, albeit I didn't include any corner forwards in my analysis, don't think. So the analysis for that first study, I looked at an athlete that represented, a couple of athletes that represented like middle third, an athlete that represented the inside forward line, and an athlete that represented the inside back line. And it seems to be reasonably even left to right. But I also, one of the kind of suggested future directions in that paper is considering what somebody's dominant foot is and doing some like pre-game assessments to have a look at some of those bilateral or unilateral differences to see if that has any influence on the outcome of what you're looking at in terms of frequency counts and that kind of thing. But that wasn't something I considered.
Yeah, but nice little next step for someone else. Shane, do you want to hop in on that in there?
No, that all sounds really interesting. It's an awful lot on your plate at the moment, though. Would be my main takeaway from this interview.
Throw in a 2.5-year-old daughter as well now into the mix, and it all makes for fairly.
Who needs sleep?
Fun, like.
Yeah. No, Paul, absolutely brilliant with your time. Where can people find you, or are you on the social medias or anything like that?
Social medias. I'll have to pick up the old phone here and have a look at what my handles are, because I don't actually know them. Wait a minute. On Twitter, I'm just at Paul Talty, and on Instagram, I am at Paul Talty, and LinkedIn. Those three probably your best bets. Feel free to, anybody who wants to reach out, you can email me as well at paultalty@swimarland.ie as well.
No, great stuff. We'll definitely be keeping an eye out for that first paper when it comes out. We'll hopefully get you back on maybe after Tokyo to give a recap on what it's actually just like being as part of the Olympic experience. We might dig into a bit more detail on some of that PhD in Gaelic football change direction stuff. Thanks a million for your time, Paul.
No problem at all, lads.
Cheers,
it was
Paul,
a pleasure.
thank you.
Thanks a million for having me on.